Hey there. Tonight, we won't be treading gently into ancient courts or candlelit chambers. We're stepping into the belly of something darker, something that still echoes through time, even when history tries to forget. This is a story not of power, but of powerlessness, of voices smothered by waves, and of what it truly meant to be human cargo locked in the bowels of a floating grave. Dim the lights, let your breath settle, and prepare to drift not into comfort, but into truth.
It started with a sound. Not the sound of sails or sea, but chains, rusted, dragging, like bones pulled across stone. You didn't see the ship, not at first. It loomed beyond the mangroves, half hidden behind morning fog and the cries of gulls too fat on human waste. The harbor stank of sweat and salt and something worse. Hope, maybe. What little remained of it. You'd been walked there barefoot, your wrists bound with coarse rope, your neck rubbed raw from the collar. You weren't alone. Dozens more moved beside you, limping, shuffling, coughing blood into their palms. Some had stopped looking up days ago.
You were led to a shelf barely wide enough for your hips. It stank of vomit, of urine, of teeth lost in the night. And still, someone had written something above your head in charcoal. A name, maybe, or a plea, or both. There were no candles, no fresh air, only the creak of boards above and the endless moan of the sea. And the chains, always the chains, fastened to ankles, linked to wrists, connected to strangers you didn't know, would never know, whose skin would rub against yours until it bled, until it scabbed, until you no longer remembered where their body ended and yours began. Food came twice a day, if it came at all. A bowl passed hand to hand, rice gone sour, beans with weevils, salted fish if the crew was in a good mood, which they never were. Water came in tin cups, warm and brackish. Most drank anyway. Some didn't. They died faster. Sleep was a thing you fell into only from exhaustion, and even then only for a while, because the hold never stopped moving, rocking, heaving, spitting people out in their own waste. You learned to breathe through your mouth. You learned to hold your cries. You learned the names of those who stopped waking up and the quiet way their bodies were dragged away. No one spoke of the ones who died, because no one could afford to. They'd simply vanish, overboard, into the sea, into silence. The ship moved, day by day, deeper into horizon, and all you could think was this. This isn't a voyage, it's a burial. And you were still alive only because the ship hadn't decided what to do with you yet. You lost count of the days, not because they blurred, but because the hold didn't allow time to pass in any way you could measure. No sunrise, no sunset, just heat and darkness and the drip of water from the beams above, too rhythmic, too cruel, to be anything but deliberate. You measured time in screams, not your own. The man beside you, his name was Kofi, though he rarely said it aloud, had started muttering in his sleep. Prayers, maybe, or memories. Sometimes a child's name. Sometimes just sounds that didn't belong to any language anymore. He was the only one who still looked up when the hatch opened. That hatch. A square of light in the ceiling, where the world above would spill down in sudden violent bursts,
Air, men, boots. A voice shouting numbers, always the same. Names didn't matter anymore. Only weight, age, how well you could stand or carry or bleed. Every few days, they brought some of you up. You didn't know why at first. No one told you. But you learned. The deck wasn't mercy. It was display. They'd clean you, oil your skin, make your bones look less like bones. And then they'd look. Men with coats, with ledgers, faces that didn't blink, mouths that clicked as they counted your ribs. Teeth were inspected, scars were noted. Then you were sent back down. Not all came back. Some stayed above, sold before they could even rot fully. Some jumped, if they were quick enough. Most died trying.
And some came back different. Eyes blank, bite marks on their tongues, and always silence. That was the rule below. No voices after someone vanished. No questions. Because the hold listened. And you could feel it, somehow. The ship wasn't just wood and rope and sails. It was hunger. Something built to feed on breath, on despair. The timbers swelled with every cry swallowed into them. Even your own voice began to sound different down there. Hollow. Wrong. But not everyone accepted the silence. There was an old woman farther down the hold. No one knew her name. She didn't speak in words, not anymore. But every night, when the rest of the hold finally fell still, she would hum, soft, low, a sound too fragile to live. But it did. And when she hummed, something shifted in the dark. The chains didn't bite so deep. The breath came a little easier. Even Kofi's muttering slowed. It was a sound like soil, like a root refusing to die. Someone asked her once, very quietly, what the song meant. She didn't answer. She just reached out her hand, and in her palm, a nail. Long, rusted, curved like a question. It had come from the floorboards, she said, pulled loose with a toe, saved with care, and now passed on. You didn't know what it was meant for. Freedom, rage, survival? She never said. But that night, when the creaking above signaled more footsteps, more men, more display, the nail felt heavier in your hand. Not like a weapon, but like a decision.
You didn't sleep that night. Not really. You held the nail beneath your thigh, nestled in the cloth of what once was trousers. The metal pressed cold into your skin, like it remembered the sea. You told yourself you were keeping it safe, just in case. But deep down, you knew the truth. You were afraid of it. Afraid of what it meant to finally hold something sharp in a place where everything was dull, numbed, blunted by pain. The others said nothing. They had seen you accept it. That was enough. The old woman hummed again, this time slower. And just before her voice gave out, she whispered a word. Kuman. It meant nothing to you then. Later, it would mean everything. Morning, or what passed for morning, came with a violent slap of daylight across the hold. The hatch slammed open and boots followed. Not many, just 2 men this time. One of them, the red-haired one, liked to laugh when he hit people.
He laughed when he picked Kofi, and again when he pointed at you. You didn't move at first. You were used to watching others go up. But then he shouted something in a language that needed no translation. You rose. Kofi didn't meet your eyes. The ladder burned under your feet, sunlight hotter than it had any right to be. And then, deck.
The sky was too blue. The sails flapped like wings of some creature too stupid to know what it carried. They stripped you both again, oiled your arms, checked your joints, made you open your mouth, your eyes, your hands. Kofi trembled when they touched his scar. "Big enough," one of the buyers said. The captain shook his head. "Too quiet. Don't want one that breaks early." That was when the red-haired sailor struck Kofi. A backhand. Casual. Like swatting a fly. Kofi didn't fall, but he bled. And still he didn't speak. The buyer turned away. Just like that, Kofi became unsold, unneeded. The red-haired man pushed him hard. "Back down." You moved without thinking, stepped between them. The sailor raised his hand again, but this time, you reached. The nail wasn't sharp, it wasn't strong, but rage doesn't need much. You drove it into his arm. He screamed. Blood, bright, red, alive, splashed the deck. Everything stopped. No orders, no shouts, just the sailors howling. And you, standing there, panting, holding the nail. Then the blow came. Not from the sailor, but from behind. A rifle stock to the back of your head. The sky spun. Kofi caught you before you hit the boards. You didn't remember the rest. Only darkness and water and the sound of humming.
You woke to darkness again. Not the calm, indifferent dark of night, but the thick, pressing dark of being buried alive. Your head throbbed. Every heartbeat sent a fresh wave of pain through your skull, as if your brain had been cracked open and stitched shut with fire. The hold smelled worse now, worse than before, somehow, as if the ship itself had begun to rot. Your cheek was pressed against damp wood, your arms twisted behind you. The nail, gone. You felt the absence more than anything else, like a pulled tooth, like a missing rib. Kofi was there, silent. He sat beside you, his back against the wall. His eyes weren't red, but they were hollowed out. "They took her," he said. You didn't need to ask who. The old woman's shelf was empty. Her humming was gone. No one had heard her scream. She had simply vanished between one breath and the next, like a vapor or a dream. Some said she was tossed overboard as punishment. Others said she never existed, that she was just something the ship made up to keep you from cracking in half. But you remembered her hand, the way she gave you the nail, the word she had spoken, Kuman. It meant to endure. And now you had no choice but to do just that. You'd expected the punishment to come quick. It didn't. That was worse.
Every creak of the hatch, every thump of a boot, every time light cut through the hold, you waited. You flinched. But nothing came. Until it did. Not during the day. At night.
when most of the hold had finally fallen into that shallow, miserable half-sleep. 2 sailors came down. One held a lantern, the other held a rope. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. You were hauled up like cargo, not to the deck, but to a part of the ship you'd never seen, smaller, hotter. A room with hooks on the walls and a floor slick with blood that never dried. They tied your wrists above your head, and then they left. No words, no threats, just silence. You hung there, barely touching the floor. Minutes passed, then hours. You lost track of the number of times your knees buckled and screamed to lock. Your shoulders burned, your mouth dried. You wept not from fear, but from the slow, stupid pain of being undone without purpose. When they finally returned, it wasn't with whips. It was with questions. Who gave you the nail? Who else had one? Were you planning a mutiny? You didn't speak. They broke a finger. You still didn't speak. They shoved a rag in your mouth, poured seawater in your nose, laughed as you choked. It wasn't about the nail anymore. It was about breaking you, making you a warning. Eventually you answered, but not the way they wanted. You whispered her name, the old woman's name. She hadn't told you, but you gave it to her anyway. Kuman. They didn't understand. They beat you anyway.
They left you tied. Not dead, just broken enough. Back in the hold, you were no longer one of them. You were watched now. Not by the sailors, by the others. The chained, the shackled, the surviving. Because you had done what no one else dared. You had moved. You had fought. You had said no. And that kind of defiance, it was dangerous. Even in whispers. Especially in whispers. Kofi tried to speak to you, but the pain in your shoulders made words into knives, each syllable twisting under your ribs. You couldn't lie down properly. You couldn't lift your right arm at all. Still they watched. Even the ones who never spoke. A woman with a burn scar running down her scalp passed you a strip of fabric soaked in salt water. No words, just a glance that said, "This will hurt, but it will help." And it did. A little. Enough to remember the sky. Enough to remember the sound of your mother's voice, quiet, insistent, warning you to stay out of the river at night. Enough to know you weren't gone. Not yet. The next time the hatch opened, something had changed. It wasn't just sailors anymore. It was someone new. A man in a coat with gold trim, rings on his fingers, powdered wig, though sweat had turned it gray with grime. He looked important. He didn't come to select. He came to count.
And as he pointed, mouth moving in French, or maybe Dutch, the sailors began separating you, not just by size or age, by scars, by defiance. You were one of the first. You tried to stand, failed. They kicked your feet beneath you, dragged you up, chained your wrists behind your back, tighter this time. A group of 15, that's how many they pulled. You were marched across the deck, eyes stinging from sun, skin blistering at once from heat and salt.
Then, down again, but not to the same hold. This one was smaller, quieter. It smelled like metal. You understood what this was. Not punishment, not display. This was preparation. For what, you didn't know. But Kofi was beside you, and he spoke at last. "Tonight," he said, voice hoarse, "we move." You didn't ask what he meant. You just nodded.
The new hold was different, tighter, built not for people, but for tools. Crates lined the walls, marked with paint, symbols you couldn't read. Barrels of something oily, chains bolted to the beams, but not yet filled. The air stank of gunpowder and rust. They weren't just storing you, they were hiding you. No lantern was lit. Only a slit of dying light bled from a crack in the ceiling, painting thin bars across the floor. You saw faces in it, Kofi's, the scarred woman's, a boy with trembling hands who hadn't spoken since the last port. And then, quiet voices. Too quiet for the guards above to hear. Because now, there were plans. They had no weapons, no keys, but they had fire. Not literal yet, but a spark. A thing passed in whispers, from tongue to ear, from pulse to breath. It began with what the old woman taught, endurance. But it grew into something else, refusal. They were done being cargo, done being counted. That night the ship groaned like a tired god. Rain began to fall, slow at first, then harder. The sound of it against the hull masked your movements. The guards never checked this far below, not often, not unless called. And tonight, no one would call. Kofi moved first.
His hands still bound, but his fingers busy, pulling the thin rope from the edge of a crate, twining it around a hook that had worked itself loose. The boy helped, silent but steady. The scarred woman pulled a splintered slat from the lower wall. A knife? No, but sharp enough to be something. Someone had found nails, real ones this time, bent but long, like the one you'd used. Your heart pounded, not with fear, with certainty. This is it. When the ship rocked to starboard, maybe from wind, maybe from fate, the moment came. Kofi stood. The others followed. You rose too, slow but sure. The door creaked, and the red-haired sailor appeared. Alone. He had come to yell or to laugh. He never got the chance. They swarmed him. No screams, just motion. Silent, fast. You watched the boy, small, trembling, strike with the splintered slat, again and again. It was over in seconds. Kofi took the keys. You took the sailor's blade. It wasn't sharp, but it would do. Above, thunder cracked. The ship swayed. Voices shouted on deck. No one noticed you slip into the corridor, barefoot, bleeding, burning. Not yet. But they would, because the fire below was spreading. The storm covered everything. Wind slammed into the hull like an angry beast, and the rain fell sideways, stinging your skin as soon as you reached the deck. The world above was chaos. Sails flapping loose, ropes whipping like snakes, men shouting over the roar of the sea. No one noticed you at first. No one saw you. You were soaked and barefoot, just one more shadow in the storm. Kofi climbed up behind you, keys in hand, eyes wide but focused. He wasn't the same man from the hold anymore. None of you were.
You moved fast, straight for the main hatch. Below deck, more waited. The 15 had become 30, then 50. Each set of keys bought another freed wrist, another pair of hands. The blade you carried found work quickly, prying open latches, cutting rope, tearing through the fabric that kept your people bound and voiceless. But the ship noticed. Eventually, someone always does. A whistle cut through the storm, sharp and shrill. Then, gunshots. The first to fall was the boy with the trembling hands. A flash of light, a sound like the sky breaking. He dropped near the barrels, his body folding like paper, eyes still open. You didn't scream. You couldn't. Instead, you pushed forward, dragging Kofi by the wrist as men poured from the captain's quarters, armed, panicked, unsure of how many of you there were. You weren't sure either. That was the point. Confuse them, scatter them, let the sea fight for you.
One of the women took a lit lantern from the upper deck and hurled it into the stores. It shattered on impact. Oil caught fire. Flames licked upward, hungry orange tongues reaching for the rigging. Men screamed now, not your men, theirs. They tried to beat it back, but the rain couldn't save them. Not from fire below, not from the rising voices, dozens of them singing in no language the officers understood. It was an old song, one you didn't know you knew. Something from before chains, before names. It had rhythm, it had rage, it had purpose. And it gave the storm a second heartbeat. Smoke rolled across the deck. Fire turned the masts into torches. You saw a sailor leap overboard, his coat still burning, his arms flailing against the sea. Another dropped his musket and ran. Kofi shouted something behind you. You turned and saw him pull down the Union Jack. He held it in both hands, then threw it into the flames. And for 1 second, just one, you felt something like hope. Then came the crack. Not thunder. Wood. The ship was breaking. Not from fire. From below. Too many voices. Too much weight. Too much refusal. It couldn't hold you anymore. The sea wanted you back.
The deck split like a jaw. One moment, the boards were beneath your feet. The next, they weren't. The ship's spine had fractured near the foremast, and the hull groaned like it was trying to scream. You stumbled, caught yourself on a rope, and watched as one half of the deck lurched upward, swallowing a man whole as it tore open. Kofi was gone, swallowed in the smoke, or the flames, or the crush of bodies now surging toward the railings. The ship wasn't sinking, it was surrendering. You ran, not with purpose, just away. The fire was everywhere now, eating through sails, ropes, barrels. Screams clashed with the roar of the wind and the cracking of timber. You reached the edge of the deck. No lifeboats. They were long gone, or never meant for people like you. A musket fired somewhere behind you, then another. You jumped. The sea hit like stone, cold, black, full of hands. You sank, deeper than you thought possible, deeper than the weight of your body should have allowed. It was the chains. Even now the ocean remembered. But you kicked. You refused. Your lungs screamed. Your heart staggered. And then, light. Flickering. Dim. You clawed toward it. When you broke the surface, you weren't alone.
All around you, heads bobbed in the foam. Some swimming, some barely afloat. A barrel drifted past with 2 men clinging to it, one bleeding, the other crying something in a language you didn't know. The ship was behind you now, blazing like a floating funeral pyre. The storm had taken mercy, for now. Rain still fell, but the winds had eased, and the sea held you in its vast, uncaring arms. You drifted. For minutes. For hours. No one counted. Then, dawn. Gray and bitter. The light revealed what the dark had hidden. Too few survivors. No sails on the horizon, just the endless, heaving sea. And yet, you were still alive. The ocean had not claimed you. Not yet. Covey surfaced beside you, a piece of timber under one arm. He didn't speak. He just looked at you, blood on his temple, salt in his beard, and nodded. You grabbed the wood. Together, you floated. Not rescued, not saved, but free. And that, for now, was enough.
The sun rose dull and colorless, casting no warmth. It glared down from a bleached sky as if ashamed of what it saw. Salt crusted your lips. Your skin, once slick with seawater, now burned dry beneath its hand. Each breath scraped your throat. Each blink ached behind your eyes. But you held on. You drifted in silence beside Kofi, who no longer bled, but whose eyes had gone soft and far off. He didn't speak that day, nor did you. There were no words for thirst that thickened your tongue to lead, or for hunger that gnawed at your belly like a second set of ribs trying to claw free. Others floated nearby, scattered across the waves like discarded fruit. Some had tied themselves to bits of broken sail. Others clutched what remained of casks or crates. One man sang to himself. A woman whispered prayers. A boy, barely more than a child, called for his mother long after his voice had cracked and vanished. Birds circled, the wrong kind. They came not from the shore, but from death. One man struck another for a floating rope. He was struck back, then vanished beneath the water, and neither resurfaced. The sea did not mourn. It merely rolled on. That night, the stars returned, sharp and distant, cold eyes in a dark sky. You wondered if one of them was yours, if, as the elders said, each soul was born with a star, and when it blinked out, so did your name. But the stars overhead burned too brightly. You were still here. Kofi coughed once in the dark, then twice. You reached for him, found his hand, and held it. It was the only warm thing in that endless wet world. No words passed between you, only grip, only pulse. By dawn, the sea had changed. Not calmed, not warmed, but softened. A shadow lay ahead, low, long, steady. Land. A smear of green and gray on the horizon. You couldn't trust it. It could be smoke. It could be memory. But it drew closer. Waves curled in a rhythm that felt deliberate, as if the water itself was carrying you forward now, deciding your path for you, a current beneath your tired limbs. The sun climbed, and with it so did your dread, because land meant questions. Whose land? Whose laws? Freedom wasn't the same everywhere. Sometimes it wore a mask. Sometimes it used your name like a chain. By midday, a strip of beach emerged, pale sand, mangroves, and a crooked tree leaning toward the sea like it was whispering to the water. Behind it, jungle. Dense, humid, alive. You and Kofi washed ashore like forgotten relics. You didn't weep. You didn't pray. You only breathed, because breathing was all your body remembered how to do. That and running. Always running. Kofi sat up first. He spat salt and sand, then looked back, not at you, but at the sea.
You think it'll come back? He asked. You didn't answer, because it never left. The salt had lived in your skin long before you fell into the sea, and now it would stay. Even on land, even in peace, if such a thing still waited. Even here, where freedom was only the beginning of another kind of hunger.
The sand was soft, but it bit into your back like gravel. Too fine, too dry, too bright. It made your skin ache as you lay there, motionless, salt-laced, unsure if you'd washed ashore or been buried alive. Kofi rose first. He stood swaying, wind-drunk, half shadow and half ghost. His shirt had shredded to ribbons, hanging like whispers from his shoulders. His legs trembled, but he walked to the waterline, to the edge where waves kissed the land as if trying to coax it back into the ocean. You followed, not because you wanted to, but because you couldn't stay still. The jungle loomed behind the beach, its edge jagged with thorns and vines and old roots like twisted hands rising from the ground. The green was thick, a kind of green you could drown in. Hot, wet, buzzing with insects you couldn't see but could hear. A chorus of hunger and warning. No ships, no sails, no voices. Just you, Kofi, and the humid breath of a land that had never once asked to be found. By midday, your thirst had grown teeth. The salt in your mouth turned to paste. Kofi pointed to a ridge of black rock jutting between the trees and said, "Water runs down." You climbed. Each step sank deep into loam and rot. Leaves slapped your face. Spiders spun lines across your chest like blessings or traps. You didn't speak. Neither did Kofi. The silence between you had deepened into something older, something almost holy. Two men who had died at sea and washed up somewhere even quieter. At the top of the ridge you found a spring. Barely more than a trickle, but cold, clear. It saved you. For now. You cupped it in your hands like it might vanish, drank until your stomach ached, washed your face, rinsed your wrists. Kofi filled a broken gourd he'd found in the sand and crouched in silence, eyes closed, face bent like prayer. Still no birds, no animals, only the wind. And beneath it, something else. A hum. Low, almost imagined, like a drum heard through the belly, not the ears. You followed the sound. Not with your feet, but with something older, something in your spine. It led you down the other side of the ridge, deeper into the jungle, where the trees bent in odd ways and the vines grew in spirals. You found a clearing. Stones there, stacked, worn, unnatural. Shapes not made by wind or time. A ring, half buried in moss. In the center, a pit, shallow, cold, filled with ash. Beside it, a post, rotted at the base, stained dark at the top. You didn't speak. Kofi didn't either. You knew what it was. A place for burning, or for holding, or both. The kind of place made by people like the ones who'd chained you. The kind of place that didn't forget. Kofi kicked the post once. It didn't move. "You think they're still here?" he asked, voice quiet, like it might echo too loud. "No," you said. Then, yes, because something was watching.
You felt it behind your ribs, a weight, a breath not your own. You left the clearing, didn't run, didn't cry, just walked. Because the island didn't care if you were free.
The island didn't care who you were. The island remembered pain the way stone remembers fire, quietly, permanently. That night, you made a fire. You shouldn't have, but the dark pressed in too close, and you wanted to see Kofi's face when he spoke. He told you about his sister, how she danced in the village square when she was 10, how he buried her name when they were taken just to keep it safe. You didn't tell your story, not because it hurt, but because you were afraid it had already been forgotten, even by you. The fire hissed and spat. The trees didn't move, and above, the stars shivered, not out of cold, but out of memory.
In the days that followed, time began to loosen its grip. It no longer passed in hours or in sunrises. It passed in the weight of each breath, in the slow healing of wounds, in how many times the gourd could be filled before the spring grew shallow, and in the sound of the wind, which sometimes howled like a ship's sail, and sometimes didn't sound like wind at all. You and Kofi built a shelter from what you could carry: palm fronds, driftwood, rope pulled from the waves. It leaned too far to the left and creaked in the night like a warning, but it kept off the worst of the rain. You made no plans. You spoke few words, because in truth, neither of you believed you were meant to stay. Islands, after all, were not destinations. They were pauses, breaths, places between suffering. And this one breathed oddly. Some nights, the jungle glowed faintly, not with moonlight, with something else, as if the trees themselves remembered fire. You didn't go near the clearing again. Even Kofi avoided it. But you noticed him watching the ridge often, brow furrowed, lips tight, as if listening for a voice that never spoke loud enough, or one that had spoken once and said something he couldn't forget. One morning, you woke to find him standing barefoot in the water. The tide was high, the foam brushing his knees, but he didn't move, just stood there, hands open to the sea. "What are you doing?" you asked. "Trying to forget," he said. You didn't ask what, because you were trying too. The days stretched. Your skin grew dark, salt clung to your scalp, your body thinned, but it was hunger without panic, the kind that came gently, with long shadows and slower steps. You learned to roast crabs on a flat stone. You found roots you could chew. You no longer jumped at the rustling trees. You stopped expecting rescue, but you didn't stop listening, because the island still whispered. Once, you found bones in the sand. Not human, not large, small, arranged carefully in a perfect spiral, each curve precise. There were shells around them, braided reeds, marks drawn in charcoal or blood. You didn't touch them. You buried them beneath the dunes and said no prayer. That night, the fire wouldn't light. The sky opened, and the sea rose, and you huddled in the shelter as rain hammered the roof like fists. You dreamt of chains. Not iron, not rusted. Chains made of names. Your mother's voice, your brother's laugh, the sound of your own voice calling out in a language the ocean had swallowed long ago. You woke crying, and Kofi held your hand without asking why. The next morning, you found him carving something into the driftwood plank you used for sitting. A word, or part of one. Not English, not anything you knew. He said it came to him in a dream, that it felt like a key. You didn't ask what it opened, because the air had changed. The island had grown quiet, not peaceful, just
still, like it was listening again, waiting. That afternoon, as you walked the shore looking for shells, you saw something strange just beyond the reef. Dark, straight, tall. A mast, or a trick of light. You called for Kofi. He ran to you, squinting at the horizon. The shape didn't move. It just stood there, distant, watching. Kofi whispered, "Do we signal?" You said nothing, because in your chest something cold had settled. Because sometimes rescue comes too late, and sometimes it doesn't come at all. You watched the ship, or the shape, until dusk. Then it vanished, like a name forgotten. That night, Kofi slept beside the fire. You sat awake, listening, not to the trees, not to the sea, but to the silence inside yourself. And you realized you weren't waiting anymore. You were remembering.
When the morning came, the shore was different. No footsteps from the night before, no broken shells, just a line drawn clean through the wet sand, not made by tide or crab, straighter than wind, thinner than any root. It pointed inland. Kofi saw it too. He didn't speak, just stared at the mark, then at you, and then at the jungle beyond, where the trees rose like ribs from a buried god. You followed it, because what else was there to do? The path wound deeper than you had walked before, past the pools where frogs sang to the dusk, past the grove with the leaning tree, where Kofi had once found a necklace made of carved bone. The birds were quiet, the air still. You came upon the stones at midday, half buried in moss and silence, stacked in a wide ring that might once have been a wall or a mouth. Shapes had been scratched into their surfaces, not words, not quite. Spirals, lines, loops, like language abandoned before it learned to speak. At the center, a pit, empty. No bones, no ash, just black soil and the faint scent of salt and iron. Kofi knelt by the stones. "They waited here," he said. "Not for ships." "For what then?" you asked. He didn't answer. That night, you dreamed again. But it wasn't the ship or the chains or the dark hold filled with coughing breath. It was your mother's hands, not holding, washing, wringing out linens, blood-stained and wet, her face turned away from you. You called her name, but she didn't answer. When you woke, the air felt heavier, and Kofi was gone. You found his footprints on the path. They led back to the stone ring. You followed them through the hush, heart loud in your chest. Birds watched you from the branches, still and silent, not blinking. The ring was empty. No Kofi. Just the carvings on the stones, which now seemed deeper, sharper. You touched one. It was warm, like skin. You didn't call out. You just waited. As the sun dropped and shadows returned,
By dusk, the sea had risen higher than usual. The waves bit at the roots of trees. Fish floated belly up near the tide pools. The air smelled of copper. And still, no Kofi. That night, you built the fire alone, and when you slept, it was shallow, restless.
You dreamed of a ship again. Not the one that burned, but a different one. Older. No sails, no crew. Just oars. Countless oars, moving in perfect silence. And on its deck stood Kofi, no longer bruised or bloodied, just clean, dressed in white, eyes closed. You called his name. This time, he opened his mouth, but no words came, only a sound, low, endless, like the sea breathing. You awoke at dawn, alone, and yet not. The shore had changed again. Not visibly, but you felt it. In the sand, in the sky, in yourself. The island was not shrinking. You were. Not in body, but in memory. You had to say your name aloud just to remember its shape. You wrote it in the sand, over and over. But the waves erased it faster now.
The firewood grew damp overnight, though it had not rained. Even the driest branches, those you had stacked neatly beneath the bent palm, felt spongy now, as if the island had begun to sweat. You tried to light them anyway. Flint, breath, tinder, but the flame refused to take. It guttered and died, coughing smoke like a warning. You sat beside the cold ash as the sky turned gray, and listened. Not to birds, they were gone. Not to wind, it had stopped days ago, but to the faintest sound beneath the silence. A kind of rhythm, faint, repeating, like breathing through teeth. You pressed your ear to the sand. There it was again. A thump, a pause, another. Not your heartbeat. Deeper, older. The memory of drums. You walked the shoreline in slow, wide circles. The tide had drawn strange lines in the sand, curves, hooks, impossible loops. No waves could make such shapes, no tide that followed scents or moonlight. Still, the marks were not written by hands. You followed them inland, back to the stone ring. Something had changed. The pit, once empty, now held water. Black, still, too still. No rain had fallen, and yet it shimmered faintly, like skin stretched thin over breath. You knelt at its edge, careful not to touch it. Your reflection didn't match your movements. You turned your head, it did not. You blinked, it stared. When it finally moved, it smiled. You stepped back, fell. The soil gave underfoot, soft, then spongy, then slick. You clawed your way back with shaking hands, tasting blood where your lip had torn. Behind you, the trees were whispering. Not leaves, not wind. Whispers. Names. Not yours. Not yet. You left the ring by dusk, back to the camp. No Kofi.
just a mark on the tree near where he'd slept, a spiral. Fresh. The same shape carved into the stones, into your memory. You didn't eat. You couldn't. The fruit had turned sour. The fish too soft. Even the water from the stream now tasted of metal. That night the sky blinked. No stars, no clouds. Just one pulse of light, and then nothing. But in that moment you saw them. Faces, pressed into the canopy above. Dozens, maybe more, eyes closed, lips parted, singing. No sound, just the shape of it. You wept without knowing why. You were not cold. You were not afraid. But you were not you anymore. Something had been taken. Not at once, bit by bit. And when you awoke, your name did not come. You did not remember the weight of it. You sat by the dead fire, fingers tracing the spiral on your palm. It hadn't been there the night before. You hadn't carved it. You didn't need to. It had always been there. You simply hadn't seen it yet.
The morning came quietly, as it always did now. Not with birdsong, or wind through the palms, or the groaning creak of the tide, but with stillness. So complete, it felt like the pause between the closing of eyes and the final breath. You no longer expected noise. It was something for the old world. And you no longer spoke aloud. There was no one to answer. You walked barefoot along the waterline. The sand was warm despite the dusk-colored sky, and the tide had retreated farther than usual, revealing a long stretch of seafloor that should have remained buried. There were bones there. Not broken, not scattered. Whole. Laid carefully like offerings. A ribcage curved gently near a pool of still water. A jawbone grinned up at you from the kelp. Vertebrae in long, perfect rows like rosary beads left out to dry. But you didn't run. You stepped between them with the reverence of someone walking through a memory. There was no fear. There was only the quiet sense that this had all happened before. And then you saw it. The shape. Etched into the exposed stone where the waves once reached. Spiral. Perfect. Deep. Still wet from where the sea had kissed it last. And beside it something else. A word. Not in English, not in any language you knew, but somehow familiar. You mouthed the shape of it, once, twice, and your teeth ached, not from speaking, but from remembering. Your name surfaced with it, only for a breath, and then it vanished again, swallowed by the sand, by the stone, by the word that wasn't yours, but lived inside your ribs. You sat there until the water returned. The tide crawled back like a slow hand, wrapping its fingers around your ankles. You let it. Because the island had taught you something. Things do not disappear. They transform. Kofi was not gone, nor were the others. They had simply changed shape. Maybe they were the bones, maybe the spiral, maybe the wind that no longer blew. You were beginning to understand. That evening, you climbed the highest hill, the place where the canopy broke, where you could see the ocean curve into the edge of the world. And there, far in the distance, you saw sails. But not white, not canvas, black. Not fluttering, but trembling, like breath caught in a throat. There were three, and they moved without wind, gliding, hunting. They didn't need to be fast. They already knew where you were. You climbed down slowly, not with dread, not with panic, but with purpose. You returned to the stone ring and stepped into the water that waited there. Warm, still, accepting. It rose only to your knees, then your waist, then your chest, and when it reached your lips, you did not resist. You whispered the word carved into the stone, and the spiral answered, not in sound, but in memory. It wrapped around your bones like a second skeleton. It kissed your thoughts clean of names, and you breathed deeply for the first time in years. Tomorrow the ships would arrive, but there would be no one left to greet them. Only the island, still and full.
They say water forgets, but the water here did not. It remembered everything. It remembered the ships and the chains, the first screams swallowed by wind, the hundreds of hands that clutched at splintered wood, and the silence that followed when no hands remained. It remembered names, more than you could count, though no one spoke them now. And it remembered you, because you were still here. The days no longer had beginnings. The sky held no sun, just a dull pewter light, as though the heavens had been scrubbed clean of color. The island's trees had grown strange, bending, curling, leaning toward the center as if listening for something underground. The spiral had spread. You saw it in the bark, in the veins of leaves, even in the cracks of your own fingernails, as if it were not a mark, but a pattern, something beneath the world's skin, now rising to the surface. You did not speak. Your voice had grown foreign, rough with disuse. But sometimes you sang, wordless sounds, low and slow, the kind of melody that settles deep in bone. You weren't alone in the song. The trees hummed with you, the stone joined in, faint and trembling. This was how memory was kept now, not in books, not in blood, but in vibration, in rhythm, in the spiral. One morning, if it could be called that, you found something new on the shore. A shoe, worn thin, covered in seaweed, the leather split down the side. A child's shoe. You stared at it for a long time, not because of what it was, but because of what it meant. There were others, more ships, more passengers, more who would come, not knowing what waited. You walked the beach slowly, following the tide line, and as you walked, the sea gave back its secrets. A comb, a rusted spoon, a doll with no eyes, a chain, still warm. You picked it up. It hummed in your hand, not with magic, not with malice, but with history. A weight not made of metal, but of time. That night, you didn't sleep. You returned to the pit at the island's center, the water now black and glass smooth, undisturbed. You knelt beside it and whispered, not prayers, not names, just thanks. Because you understood now, you were not a survivor. You were an echo. You were what the sea left behind to remember. And the island, ancient, broken, kind in a way the world had never been, had accepted you. It did not ask for penance. only presence. So you stayed. You tended to the bones. You braided vines through the branches, shaped them into spirals so the others would know they had been seen. When the wind returned, when the sails came again, you did not go to meet them. You simply stood among the trees and waited. And when they stepped ashore, skin salt-licked, eyes hollow from hunger and hope, you would welcome them, not with words, but with the silence of the trees, the hum beneath the sand, the spiral drawn in ash and water. Because this was not escape, this was after. And the island never forgets.
They came in silence, as if the ocean had tired of their weight and handed them over like secrets too old to carry. 4 of them, stumbling into the shallows, ragged, eyes burned dry by salt, no song left in their bones. 2 men, a woman, and a boy who did not speak. They didn't call out, didn't ask where they were. They just stood, knee-deep in the water, staring at the black sand as if unsure whether it would hold them or swallow them. You watched from the tree line, not hiding, just waiting. The island would greet them first. It always did. The breeze was the first to touch them, soft and warm, though the air should have been cold. Then the trees leaned ever so slightly, their branches arching overhead like ribs forming a cathedral. Only then did you step forward. They did not flinch, because somehow they already knew you. Not your name, not your face, but something deeper, the rhythm of you, the quiet that moved through your body like tidewater. The woman fell to her knees, not from exhaustion, but reverence. The boy still did not speak, but his eyes tracked the spiral drawn in the sand beneath your feet, and he smiled, a crack of something new in the silence. You took them up the old path, not the one worn by feet, but the one shaped by memory, the moss remembering where your soles had pressed it, the stones remembering your weight. You led them past the grove where names once wept, past the pool that no longer reflected the sky, to the center, where the spiral widened, not a symbol anymore, a place, a pulse, a doorway. You did not explain. They did not ask. They lay down without instruction, curling their limbs inward like seeds. The earth welcomed them, slowly, gently, cradling their forms as if they were always meant to return. You sat beside them, hands in the dirt, breathing with the soil, and as the sky darkened, not with clouds, but with something older, something vast and remembering, you hummed. The boy hummed too, then the others. The sound spread, carried by the roots, by the bones, by the water deep below. It was not mourning. It was not joy. It was the spiral sung. For those who came, for those who passed, for those who remained even as the world turned its face and forgot. The stars did not appear. They didn't need to. Everything lit from within now. You closed your eyes. The boy rested his head in your lap, and in the hum, in the hush, in the great quiet of the island's breath, you knew. This was not the end. This was the shape of forever.
Time no longer passed the way it once did. The island kept no seasons, no sunrises, no clocks. It breathed in a long, slow rhythm, and you breathed with it, your lungs taking the shape of its exhale, your thoughts trailing behind its vast, patient silence. The four who came had not left. They had not asked to. They did not speak of the sea, nor of the life they carried before it, though it clung to them in the folds of their clothing, in the twitch of their fingers when the wind stirred too suddenly. The woman, her name was Caliane, had begun to tend the grove. She braided small spirals into the grass with her hands, laying flat the tall reeds so that they pointed inward, like they too wished to be nearer the center. The men built no shelter. They slept beneath the open sky, their backs pressed to the ground as if listening for something still moving deep beneath the island's crust. The boy, they called him Leo, never uttered a word, but he drew. With sticks, with stones, with the ends of his fingers in the ash, spirals at first, then shapes, faces, places that did not exist on this island, great buildings, boats, creatures with wings and too many eyes. He left his drawings in the trees, pinned with thorns or tucked into the bends of roots. And you? You watched. You tended to the names. There were more now, carved lightly into bark, painted with earth on the rocks above the cove, whispered into jars of salt water left by the shore. The dead were not gone here. They walked, gently, through the edges of sleep. They brushed past your skin when the night was deepest, not haunting, not cruel, just present. One night, as the sea glowed faintly green beneath a moonless sky, you saw the boy standing near the edge of the deep pool, the one no one approached. His toes were in the water. His hands were held wide. And above him, the sky swirled. Not clouds, not stars. Something deeper, moving, spiraling, as if the heavens themselves were remembering the shape. You did not stop him. You only stepped forward, close enough to share his shadow. He turned to you, and in his hand, a shell. Inside it, a single word, carved so small you could only feel it with your fingertip. It was not a name. It was not a warning. It was a calling. You nodded, and for the first time, Leo smiled. Behind him, the water shivered, and you knew the spiral was not only in the earth, it was not only in the bones, it reached upward too, into the sky, into memory, into whatever came next. And you were ready to follow.
It began with the sound. Not thunder, not wind, something deeper. The low humming groan of the world remembering itself. You felt it first in your teeth, then your knees, then the tips of your fingers, where the old scar from the iron shackle still lived, ghost pale and nearly forgotten. The island did not shake. It breathed. The ground rose once, just once, like a belly taking in a final breath before sleep. The trees bent with it, their limbs swaying not with fear, but in recognition. Even the air felt different, less like wind, more like warmth pushing from below. Leo was gone by morning. His drawings remained, scattered in spirals across the grove, folded neatly under stones, braided into the grass where Colleen had laid her offerings. Each showed the same thing now. A door. Not too much time, not much longer. The others did not ask where he had gone. Not because they didn't care, but because they already knew. None of you spoke much anymore. The island had taught you that words were only one way to remember, and not the best. So when Colleen handed you a bundle wrapped in woven reed, food, dried roots, a flask of water, you took it without question. When she pressed a hand to your chest, palm flat over your heart, you held her there a moment longer than needed. The two men sat by the pool, not watching, waiting. And you stepped beyond them, up the ridge, past the grove, to the far edge where the land dropped into cliffs like teeth carved from black stone. The door was there. Not carved, not built, just there. The sea met it, lapped at it, vanished into it. The sound wasn't crashing waves, but whispering, like thousands of mouths murmuring all at once, too soft to understand, too loud to ignore. You stepped inside. There was no resistance, only warmth, only pressure like being remembered by something older than memory. Darkness followed. Not blind dark, but full dark. Like the kind of dark that contains everything, not nothing. You walked. Time slowed. Beneath your feet the path breathed, stone warm as skin, salt damp and soft at the edges. You passed shapes pressed into the walls. Not carvings, not relics. People, or what was left of them. Not bones, not bodies. The imprint of lives held so gently they had not crumbled. A palm, a cheek, a footprint, each still singing in a way you could not hear but felt deep in your bones, like echoes shaped into flesh. The further you went, the closer the spiral came. It wasn't marked anymore. It lived in the way the walls curved, in the rhythm of your steps, in the breath you forgot you were holding. At last, the corridor widened into a chamber, a great hollow dome. No ceiling, no floor, just a sky of water turning above you, and below a mirror image, floating in the center. Leo, eyes closed, arms outstretched, not drowning, becoming. You joined him, not with words, not with movement, with memory, with breath, and the chamber pulsed. The sea above and the sea below touched in a single point of light, and you vanished. You did not vanish, not truly. The world did not forget you. It remembered you differently. There was no sky here, no ground, only a soft and endless glow, like moonlight sinking through milk. Sound moved slowly. Light had no direction. The air held no wind, and yet something shifted, always shifting, as if the space itself were exhaling. You floated, but there was no sense of weight, no tether pulling you down. And though your limbs were yours, they were also not. They shimmered at the edges like smoke considering itself a body. Leo drifted nearby, still as before, but different now. Older, maybe, or younger. The lines of his face seemed fluid, as if memory could not make up its mind about when he had lived.
His eyes opened, wide, dark, and knowing. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Because words no longer served here. Names were skin, and you had shed yours like a cloak at the edge of the sea. Here what mattered was the shape of your sorrow, the bend of your joy, the pattern your soul left as it moved. You saw the others eventually. Not all at once, just glimpses. Colleen, her braid unwinding like thread in slow water. The two men, shoulder to shoulder, their grief wrapped around them like cloaks, worn but whole. Even Kofi. Especially Kofi. He passed near you once, silent as light, not looking back, not ahead, just being. And that was enough. The chamber, the place between sea and sky, did not ask anything of you. It did not test or bind or burn. It remembered. It held. Not as a prison, not even as a home, but as a resting. You could stay. You could remain in that stillness forever, unmade and remade in the spiral's slow rhythm. But something stirred. A thread pulled gently from your center. Not a command, not a demand. An invitation. To return. To become again. You hesitated. Because returning meant shape. It meant name. It meant hunger. And cold. And loss. It meant remembering too much. But it also meant touch. Laughter, even brief. Bread warm from the fire. Hands held in the dark. You reached out, and the chamber dimmed. Not a rejection, a blessing, a farewell. The light closed around you, not like a door, but like a hand. You felt the spiral curl inward, like sleep turning into breath. And when your eyes opened again, it was morning, the real kind. Birds calling low over the treetops, sunlight catching on dew. You were lying on the beach, the sea lapping quietly at your feet. Alone, but not empty. The island was smaller now, quieter, and though no fire burned, the hearthstones were warm. Inside your pocket, a single shell. No words carved into it, just a curve, a promise. The spiral remained, not as a god, not as a curse, but as a memory that remembered you back. And somewhere, far below or far beyond, Leo sang still. The world was not healed, but you were no longer afraid.
The tide had pulled itself low, as if bowing. The beach was silent, except for the occasional caw of a seabird and the soft hush of waves curling over the sand. You sat with your legs drawn close, a blanket of salt clinging to your skin, hair stiff from brine and sleep. You didn't know how long you'd been there. The sun was climbing now, slow but steady, burning gold into the morning mist. Farther up the shoreline, you could see what had once been the outlines of huts. Foundations only, stone and reed, turned to rot and memory. No footprints, no smoke. But it was not empty. Something lingered. Not ghosts, those were stories men told to make silence less frightening. This was quieter, stranger. The feeling of someone watching not from behind, but within. As though the soil itself had eyes. As though the island itself remembered every breath taken upon it. Your fingers
closed around the shell again. You hadn't looked at it since you woke, but now, turning it in your palm, you saw that the spiral was not carved into its surface. It had grown there, etched by time and tide, a curve that felt alive under your thumb. Behind you, the forest had changed. The grove was no longer overgrown. The trees stood in stillness, not dead, not vibrant, but listening. And where once there had been thickets, there were paths, worn by footsteps that were not yours. You walked. Not quickly, not as escape, but in the way one moves through a church after it's been abandoned, each step uncertain, each breath an apology. The spring was still there. The pool where Caline once placed her roots, where the two men had washed the salt from their skin, where laughter had once lived, however briefly. The water was clearer now. You bent to drink. It tasted like memory, not sweet, not bitter, just real. The single breath of that old world carried in the shape of something that had endured. Above the pool, someone had left a mark on the stone, not a name, not a drawing, just a handprint, still damp, not yours. You touched it anyway. And in that moment, the island pulsed again, softly. Not the great breath of before, not the tremble of deep earth, just a sigh, like someone waking from a dream. You sat there for a while, maybe minutes, maybe hours, watching the light move across the trees, listening to the hush of distant waves. You didn't feel the need to speak. There was no one to hear you. And yet, there was no loneliness. Only the vast, humming presence of a place that had watched sorrow grow and reshape itself into stillness. When you stood again, your legs were strong. Your heart was quiet. You did not look back. You did not have to. The spiral had not ended. It had simply opened. And somewhere beyond the trees, beyond the sea, beyond memory itself, it would continue turning. Not to trap you, not to test you, only to remind you you had survived. And that, in this world, was its own kind of song.
The path beyond the spring wound deeper into the island than you remembered. It wasn't new. It had always been there, perhaps hidden behind fear or simply forgotten. But now the trees leaned aside for you, not as servants, but as witnesses. Their branches, thick with age and lichen, arched overhead like the ribs of a cathedral. The forest had changed its breath. No longer tense, no longer testing you. It hummed now, softly, low and rhythmic, like the lull of water in a wooden bowl, like a song hummed by someone too tired for words. The spiral had done something, or perhaps you had, or maybe it was always meant to come to this. You walked, and the forest walked with you. Then you saw them. Figures. Not ghosts, not echoes, but something stranger. They were not light, and they were not shadow. They were weight, memory, clothed in shape, and they moved not with the precision of bodies, but with the suggestion of presence. They did not step, they flowed. You recognized none of their faces,
but you knew their eyes. They bore the same deep knowing, the same patient, mournful awareness of someone who had once lost everything and kept breathing anyway. Some were old, bent and silent, with spines curved like saplings pressed by storm. Others were children, not playful, solemn, holding hands, standing at the edge of a pool, watching their own reflections ripple into nothing. All of them carried pieces of the spiral, not on skin, but in gesture, in silence, in the small, deliberate way they existed. One passed near you, an elder with eyes clouded not by blindness, but by time. He placed his hand gently on your shoulder, and you felt it. Not warmth, not cold, recognition. Not of your face, but of your shape, the pattern of your grief, the structure of your survival. He did not speak, but the spiral in your palm pulsed once. Then the forest cleared, and ahead a rise, a hill crowned with 3 stones, tall, weathered, leaning slightly inward, as if bowing to something that had once stood in their center. You climbed. Not quickly. Each step was a remembering. Every breath an answer to a question you had never dared ask. At the top you stood alone. The sea was visible now, pale blue, still, endless. And below you, though you hadn't noticed, others had gathered. The figures again. Dozens, maybe hundreds, all turned towards you. Not worshiping, not demanding, witnessing. You looked down at your hands. The shell was gone, but the spiral remained. Not as ink or scar, but as intention. A quiet unfolding inside you, warm and terrible and beautiful. The wind passed through the standing stones like breath through a flute, and in that sound, for the first time, you understood this was not the end of the story. It was not even yours alone. You were a note in a song older than maps, one voice among many, one curve in the spiral. And somewhere, far beyond the sea, another soul was waking, half remembered, half made, waiting to learn the melody, waiting to join the song. And the spiral turned.
The wind held your breath like it wasn't ready to give it back. Down the hill, the forest stood still, and the figures remained unmoving, their faces turned not just to you, but through you, gazing past your bones into something deeper, something waiting. The sea below had drawn closer without moving. It wasn't a trick of the light. It wasn't a dream. The water was listening now. You stepped between the standing stones. No ceremony marked the moment. No flash, no tremble beneath your feet, just the quiet weight of belonging, as if the earth had accepted your footsteps as part of its own. The hill wasn't an altar. It was a door. Not one that opened, one that sank. Softly, like a sigh drawn inward, the ground beneath the stones began to settle. The grasses bent, the wind pulled back, and a faint depression took shape in the earth, wide and slow and spiraling. You walked its curve, downward, one step at a time. The spiral path led you not beneath the soil, but beneath remembering. The air was thick with the smell of brine and ash, and your fingers tingled with each turn. You weren't cold, you weren't warm, you were being unwritten. Not in a cruel way, not in the way of forgetting, but in the way of being returned, piece by piece, to a place that always knew you would come. At the bottom, the sea met you, not crashing, not rising, just there, lapping like breath against your ankles. Salt water, but it did not sting your skin. It welcomed you with the gentleness of an old friend. In the center of the spiral pool stood a figure, Eleanor. Her eyes were not open, but her face was turned toward the sky. Not the girl from before, not the wife bound by duty. She wore no braid, no gown, just the water, clinging like memory to her skin. When she opened her eyes, they were dark and clear. I waited. She did not ask what she had become. You already knew. In the spiral, no one was truly lost. They were carried forward, shape by shape, voice by voice. Eleanor stepped aside, and behind her the spiral continued, curling, not into the earth, but under the sea. Stone arches marked its path, visible just beneath the surface, lit with a glow that wasn't sunlight. Figures moved there, slowly, like ink unfurling in water. Not trapped, not swimming, becoming. You walked in, and the water did not fight you. It folded around your chest, your throat, your mouth, and you did not drown. You sang. Not with words, with shape. The song you had carried all this time, the rhythm of the spiral passed from your breath into the water, into the stone, into the waiting chorus. And the sea answered. All of it. Every tide, every tear shed on a deck, every hand that reached for freedom, every name whispered in chains. It answered. You kept walking, deeper now, past what could be remembered, past what had ever been mapped. And when the light dimmed again, it wasn't darkness. It was depth. You weren't alone. None of them ever were. And somewhere far behind, on the hilltop beneath the standing stones, the spiral still turned, waiting for the next voice, for the next step, for the next soul brave enough to remember.
Far beneath the seabed, where the spiral curved no longer as path but as presence, you drifted, not with the helpless weight of a body lost in water, but with the quiet ease of breath long held, now released. You no longer knew if you walked or floated. Time fell away, not vanished, but softened, as if years themselves had become damp pages, ink blurred by centuries of grief and salt. Here, the water was not blue. It was memory. You saw it in the walls, in the rippling surface of the stone, in the half-shapes that passed beside you, never brushing, never asking, only remembering. They did not speak, but their silence sang louder than thunder. A man passed with his arms full of bones, not skulls, but ribs, spines, delicate fingers. He dropped them one by one along the spiral, like petals. A woman floated backward, mouth open in a scream that formed birds, not sound. The birds dissolved before they touched the light. You saw yourself once, not mirrored, remembered. Sitting beneath a fig tree you had never seen, holding a child whose name was not yours to know, laughing, your mouth full of warmth and bread. A life that could have been, or once was. At the heart of the spiral was no center, just a door, but not made of wood or stone, made of silence. The kind of silence that remembers music. You reached out,
not with hand but with intention, and the door did not open. It parted. Behind it, the water changed. It was no longer sea. It was soil. And not cold, wet soil, but the kind you turn with your hands, the kind that holds seeds. You stepped forward, up, and broke through. Moss clung to your chest, dew on your eyelids, morning air in your lungs. You had risen through a place where voices were buried, not to leave them behind, but to carry them forward. The field was quiet, not empty. Around you, others knelt in the grass. Some you knew, many you did not. They looked at you with the calm of those who had not survived but returned. Isolde stood beside a tree, whispering to the bark. Thera crouched nearby, hands in the soil, planting something that shimmered, faint and red. The blinking man sat cross-legged in the distance, smiling faintly, watching shadows move in ways they shouldn't. And Milla stood in the middle of the field. Her spiral had bloomed now, reaching from heart to throat, carved not in pain but in song. She looked older, or younger, or simply eternal. "Do you remember now?" she asked. You nodded, because the spiral was never just a curse or a path. It was remembrance. Of love that could not speak its name, of pain that never found language, of histories unburied by breath alone. The village no longer existed, but the spiral did. Not beneath stone, not beneath sea, but in every step taken forward with the past held close, not to haunt, but to hum. And as you turned, walking once more toward the forest, the field behind you folded closed like a book. Not lost, just waiting to be opened again when someone else is ready to remember.
The forest did not end. It changed. What had once been a place of shadows, of eyes behind bark and breaths beneath roots, now felt different. It was still dark, still thick with memory, but it no longer watched. It waited. The moss was softer beneath your feet. The trees, though tall and ancient, leaned less inward. They no longer pressed close with warning, but bent gently, as if listening, not to intrude, but to understand. You walked alone, though never truly alone. The names followed, not spoken aloud, but felt behind your ribs. Isolde, Thera, Milla, Guy, Alinor, all of them flickering like lamp smoke, part of you now. Not ghosts, not even memories, just threads woven into whatever remained of the self that had once bled beneath the castle's stone or drifted beneath the sea. Eventually, the forest opened, not into a village or a ruin, but into light. Not sunlight, not the blaze of fire or the flash of storm. Something older, softer. A sky without stars, yet luminous. A horizon without edge, yet close enough to touch. There was no path here, only direction. You knelt and placed your hand upon the earth. It was warm. The spiral was not carved into the dirt or burned into the bark. It was in the grain of your palm, in the shape of your breath, in the quiet between your thoughts. You closed your eyes and waited, not for rescue, not for answers, but for continuance. Because this was the truth all stories forgot.
that not every tale ends with escape. Some end with understanding. The spiral had never been a warning. It had been an invitation to remember, to carry, to continue. Your final breath came not with fear, but with a kind of strange peace. You weren't being taken, you were becoming. And as the forest faded, slowly, gently, like paper dissolving in water, you felt it. The hum, the song, the shape of sorrow that had always been love, hidden in plain sight. And then, like fog in morning, you were gone, but not lost, only remembered.